Good evening, everyone. It sounds like you can hear me back there, right? I got everybody's attention. Great. Well, welcome to the TCS New York City Marathon Expert Training Panel on Pacing and Mental Confidence. This is the second in a four-part series of expert training panels that we're doing to get you ready for the 2023 TCS New York City Marathon. Today's panel is going to cover all things proper pacing techniques so you don't go out too fast, as well as overcoming any mental barriers in your training and on your race. We're going to get some logistical information out of the way before we get started with the panel. So for assistive listening devices, if you did not request an assistive listening system, you can, but you need to use one. You can actually see some of our colleagues at Bib Pickup, and they can assist you with that. For any accessible and gender-neutral restrooms, we have them right behind us around the corner. And closed captioning will be provided in the recording, which will be available on our New York Roadrunners YouTube page. The closed captioning will appear at a later time, and just note that it is auto-generated, so it may not be 100% accurate. Today's panel is being live streamed on the New York Roadrunners YouTube page, as well as the New York Roadrunners Facebook page. So hello to all those joining us virtually. And we will be taking Q&A from the audience. So we'll have about 40-45 minutes of conversation with our expert panels here, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions from the audience as well as the live stream. Coach Steve in the back will walk around with a mic when we get to that part. And our colleagues will also be monitoring the chats on the live stream. So for those folks joining us virtually, please feel free to share your questions there as well. Okay, so let's get started. Who am I? Why am I up here? I am the Diversity, Equity, and Social Responsibility Specialist at New York Roadrunners, and I will be moderating today's panel for the 2023 TCS New York City Marathon Expert Training Series, Part 2. I am not an expert. These are the experts. That is why I'm moderating today. So for those folks who are joining us here in person, on the live streams, or who will be watching this recording at a later time, I am a South Asian woman. I'm wearing a navy blue tech tee and jacket with the New York Roadrunners and New Balance logos on the front, a dark blue scarf on my head and glasses. This is for folks who are low vision or blind. And when we get to the panelists, they will be providing physical descriptions as well. So we will get started with the first panelist. To my left is Gordon. Gordon is also a colleague of mine. So Gordon is an RRCA certified running coach and has coached runners at all levels since 1985, coaching with New York Roadrunners, Athena New York, Craftsbury Running Camp, Maine Running Camp, and others. Gordon qualified for the U.S. Olympic Marathon Trials in 1988, 1992, 1996, 2000, and 2004, and was a finalist in the 1992 U.S. Olympic 10,000-meter trials. Very impressive, I know. She has represented the U.S. internationally at the 10K half marathon and marathon distances, and has run a 1 hour and 11-minute half marathon and a 2 hour 33-minute marathon time. Gordon has run more than 35 marathons, including 8 New York City marathons and countless races at other distances, and she has become a passionate virtual racer during the pandemic. She is the editorial director of New York Roadrunners and lives on Manhattan's Upper West Side with her family.
Thank you, Suman. I am a 62-year-old white woman with red hair. I like to say it's red, but it's probably mostly gray now. And I'm wearing a navy blue New York Roadrunners coach shirt with the coach insignia on the front, and I'm also wearing glasses.
Thank you so much, Gordon. With all those great achievements that Gordon has, I just want to say that I once participated in a 5K with Gordon. I walked, but Gordon ran.
You can just skip my intro after that.
Well, next, still impressive, next we have Amanda Fazio. So Amanda, known as Faz by the athletes that she works with, received her master's degree in sports psychology and motor behavior from the University of Tennessee. She is a certified mental performance consultant, a CMPC, through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. Faz works with athletes recovering from injury, overcoming performance anxiety and the yips, and training coaches at the collegiate to professional level in motivational interviewing. In the past few years, Faz has taken on a new sport identity as a runner, completing numerous half marathons, as well as running the 2024 London Marathon for the Release Recovery Foundation.
Again, hi everyone. I'm wearing a black shirt with the Sports Strata logo across the front, and I have long brown hair.
Thank you, Faz. And last but not least, we have Ricky Ma. Ricky has served as a pacer for New York Roadrunners for the last 6 years, motivating and inspiring countless runners on their journeys. Over the years, he has laced up for over 40 half marathons and a number of marathons, demonstrating his commitment to endurance and perseverance. Ricky will be pacing the 4 hour and 50-minute group for this year's TCS New York City Marathon. And Ricky is also an endurance athlete, having completed various half Ironmans. Very impressive.
All right, Faz, thank you for the introduction. My name is Ricky, and I'm a Asian male with black hair, with a navy-white striped pacer singlet and beige pants.
Thank you very much. So now that we have introduced our panelists, we'll move into some questions that we have put together for the panelists. Just as a reminder, we'll have questions from the audience for the last 10-15 minutes of this session. So please save your questions for the folks on the live stream. Coach Steve is keeping an eye on those chats, so please feel free to enter your questions there. So how many folks here were at the first session that we had about a month ago? Okay, so a couple. And how many folks are running the 2023 TCS New York City Marathon? Okay, full room. How many of you are running it for the first time? Awesome, okay, you're at the right spot. And there's just enough time. So we are about 11 weeks out, folks. I'm going to ask our experts to briefly talk to us about what is the most important things that runners should be thinking about now that we are about 11 weeks out, right? So we'll start with you, Gordon. Where should runners be right now in terms of mileage?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to see so many people here and to see all those raised hands of people doing the marathon this year and also doing it for the first time. I go way back with the New York City Marathon. I did my first New York in 1984, and that was also my first marathon. And 29 years ago, it just was one of the most unforgettable days of my life. So you guys are all in for a treat. I'm really, really excited to be speaking to you. In terms of mileage, as Suman mentioned, we are I was thinking about this morning, 11.5 weeks out from 11.5. How about that? So the marathon is going to be on November 5th. You have plenty of time. So in terms of mileage, we're not yet into what we sort of call the mega mileage, the peak mileage. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not there yet, that's fine. You're not supposed to be there yet. You do not want to be doing your highest mileage right now. We're going to get there, and I hope you'll come back for the subsequent talks that we'll be having, panels that we'll be having as we get into those big mileage weeks. Right now, I can't give you, obviously you're all at different points in your training, or you're all at different fitness levels, and you're following different programs, so I'm not going to sit up here and tell you should be doing X miles per week. But you should be at a point where you're about half to 2/3 of the way toward your peak mileage. So, for example, if you're following a plan where your peak mileage week is going to be, let's just say, 50 miles a week, you should be doing between like 25 and 30, maybe low 30s right now per week. I just want to emphasize with mileage that your weekly mileages are averages. Your weeks are going to go up and down based on all kinds of things, like whether you do your long run on a Saturday or a Sunday, and whether you start your week on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Monday. I happen to start my week on a Monday. That's just the way I've always organized my training for years and years. It's not right, it's not wrong, it just is how I organize my training. So, my week then ends on a Sunday. So, let's say, for example, one weekend I'm away and I have to do my long run on a Monday rather than on a Sunday. That following week is going to be a big mileage week, and the previous week is going to be a lower mileage week. So don't get too hung up on exactly how many miles you are doing each week and how the weeks compared one to the other. Just average right now, you should be at about half to 2/3 of the peak mileage that you're going to be hitting, probably in late September, early October, the highest mileage weeks, where you might be doing an 18-mile run or even a 20-mile run, depending on your training program. This weekend, as you can see over here, we have a 12-mile training run going on in Central Park. It's called the TCS New York City Marathon Training Series 12-miler. That's a really nice gauge. I'm going to be doing that race. I'm not running New York. I'm running the Philly Marathon, which is 2 weeks later, and I'm really excited to be doing that 12-miler as a training run, because 12 miles, based on my marathon being 2 weeks after New York, is just about where I want to be right now. So hopefully that helps you guys understand that you shouldn't be freaking out if you're not doing big, heavy miles right now. You actually don't want to be doing that mega mileage, because then you'll peak too soon, and by the time New York comes around in the beginning of November, you'll be a little overcooked, as we say. But at the same time, you do want to be, starting to develop a mindset of doing long runs on the weekends, and, maybe just getting into that double-digit territory with 10 miles, 12 miles, even 13 or 14 miles. Hope that helps. Hope it's general enough to address all of your concerns around mileage, but specific enough to know, you should be thinking about long miles, big miles, but not quite there yet.
Awesome. That was a very hopeful answer that Gordon gave. Ricky, you've been pacing with us for about 6 years, right? So you may have noticed, many runners, they have issues pacing the New York City Marathon, especially for folks for whom it may be their first time. They go out way too fast and then they hit the wall in their later miles. How can folks train now for success on race day?
Well, a lot of runners, when they hit the wall, it's mainly because they're out of energy and they're going out, like in the question, right? They're going out way too fast in the beginning. So my suggestion to everybody is run slow. Run slow to run fast. And a lot of times running slow is probably just as hard as training to run fast, because you have to sort of dial down your adrenaline level when you're running. And when you're in Staten Island waiting for that cannon to go off, you've been there for maybe like 2 or 3 hours, you have a lot of energy, you're looking at these, the Staten Island Bridge, and you just want to book it. You just want to go out and just have fun. But one thing you really have to remember is slow down, because you have 26 miles to go. And right now, and in most of the training runs that you're doing now, if you're doing, say, a 10-mile training run, and your goal is ultimately to complete the 26 miles, after you complete the 10 miles, ask yourself, am I in a position to complete another 16? So this way you'll understand how your body reacts and what you need to fuel your body with for your runs later on.
Awesome. So run slow to run fast.
Yes.
Okay, just keep reminding yourself of that. And Faz, we know that throughout training, runners will encounter setbacks. And one of those setbacks can be the mental fatigue of training. More miles, more early mornings, more of everything. How do runners keep training through these setbacks?
Yeah, the big miles, as Gordon said, are coming up. But even right now, while you're training, and it can become very repetitive in our routine, right? You might have the same day that you're doing your long miles. It might be right around now starting to get, not tedious, but just something that is now constantly happening, right? It happens every Saturday or every Sunday. And so that can get us kind of stuck in a rut, and sometimes can get us in a place where we're not as motivated, right, to get up and do it, or it's, feels like it's 100% humidity out. And so one of the main things that I work with a lot of athletes on is we call this acronym our APE, and it's basically focusing on the things we can control, right? There's a lot of things on any given day, whether we're running or not, that we can't control. But our APE, controlling our inner APE, is controlling our attitude, our preparation, and our effort. And it sounds really simple, but a lot of times I encourage a lot of athletes to really think about the attitude part and the effort part as something a little beyond maybe what we normally do, and really get it down to, if I had the best running coach in the world running next to me, what would they be saying, right? What would they be saying to me so that I can be my own coach in my head, right? So as you're even doing these training runs now and things start to come up, what would somebody who is training you say, right? Being able to start to develop that now, even if it's not these gigantic runs you're doing, because then on race day, when you have all of those in front of you, you've already had that mental preparation, right? So that's your preparation right there. And then your attitude and effort are coming in when we're starting to say, okay, what can I tell myself, right? What would someone be running right next to me be saying? What would be helpful, right? And so I always say control your APE, because it's a fun little acronym, but controlling our attitude, our preparation, our effort around the runs we're starting to do right now.
Awesome. And I think the world's best coach would probably be telling you, you can do it. You can do it, Faz, you can do it. But that's great. Controlling your inner ape is what we got from that. So let's talk about some next steps. Now that we know where we are, or we're trying to figure out where we are, let's talk about where we're going. So Amanda, we'll go back to you. Mind games can happen a lot during the taper phase. So runners might be looking back on their training and they're thinking, could I have done more? Did I do enough? Should I go for another run? Talk to us about the mind games during running and how to settle one's nerves.
Yeah, so a lot of times mentally when we start having those mind games, right, humans are super susceptible to physiological arousal. So as we start playing those mind games, especially in the taper phase, and we start questioning ourselves and experiencing a lot of self-doubt, the biggest piece is we're going to, in a lot of ways, start to feel that physically, right? Especially if we're actually on our runs while that's happening. And so one of the things I like to suggest when it comes to that is being able to, again, prepare for that now by, there's this kind of like this Mike Tyson quote where he says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? At some point, we're going to get punched in the face. We're going to experience that self-doubt, and we're going to have all of those really heavy emotions and physiological arousal coming in. So as that's happening on your training runs, how can I deal with that now to kind of have that plan? But then what am I going to do when something goes wrong, right? And that doesn't mean we're trying to predict every single thing that's going to come. It's more so, am I going to think about the next time I'm going to see my family when they're at the next stop, right, that we decided on? Am I going to, when I take this next cup of water, I'm going to walk 15 steps and then I'm going to start jogging again, right? So coming up with these small little plans now to, one, when we get really, really aroused and we get really physiologically activated, our brains start to not work as well, right? And so that's when we usually start to panic. So if we already have that plan set and it's already something we're thinking about now, we're more likely to be able to bring that out and use that when it really matters. And so I like to kind of have those mini plans for when we get punched in the face, right? So having that fallback, having something that you can kind of look to and have in your back pocket, and that's going to help us ultimately get all the way through 26.2.
Great, and we have 11 and a half weeks to prepare for that, right? Exactly. In case we have not done that so far. So Gordon, you touched on this a little bit before, but many runners might have, a lot of mileage under their belt right now. They may have 15, 18, or 20 miles. How should folks be getting those very long miles in? And I know you can't speak to individual runners, right? But talk to us about their importance and how to properly prepare for them in the next month or two.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because we're sort of, we're not just getting out of the starting gates, right? We're into this, right? Most training programs marathon training programs last 16 weeks, some last 20 weeks. So you guys have been doing this for a few weeks. So I would say already look at how far you've come. Look at where you started. Maybe back in June, your long run was 6 miles or 8 miles, and now your long run is 10 miles, 12 miles, maybe 14 miles. Look back over your training logs. You should all be keeping a training log. A lot of people use, something like Strava or Garmin to record their runs. So just make sure you're uploading those runs into some sort of a calendar or something where you can look back on it and say, all right, what have I been doing? And there are a lot of reasons for that. The one is confidence, because you can see, like I said, oh, wow, that's where I was and this is where I am. And the other reason really is planning. You can say, all right, now where am I going from here? With the confidence that I'm doing this. It's not like something that I don't know how to do or I don't know how I'm going to get there. I've done a good chunk of it already, and I have a plan for doing the rest of it. And then as far as the actual process of getting there, you're starting to see what works. You're starting to see, what kind of a lifestyle you need to maintain in order to do this. I remember my first marathon back in 1984. I was right out of college. I was in New York. I was, really dazzled by bright lights, big city. But boy, did I learn quickly when I was marathon training what I needed to do on a Friday night. And it wasn't stay out until 2 a.m. dancing, right? And it was like, okay, I'll do that after the marathon. So I kind of calmed down my lifestyle a little bit. I made sure I was, trying to stay as stress-free as I could, which that wasn't always easy. And just, trying to eat like a balanced diet, a good healthy overall lifestyle. Nothing extreme, nothing weird or, like I had to eat, different foods, but just having a good lifestyle. And just really saying, okay, this is my priority. I want to do this marathon. I'm not trying to set any world records or anything, but I'd like to finish. I'd like to be proud of myself. I'd like my family to be proud of me at the finish line. So, I'm going to make sacrifices to do that. And the other thing, it's so important, and all training programs emphasize this, is to make changes gradually. You build up your long runs gradually. You build up your overall mileage gradually. You don't suddenly go from 10 miles a week to 60 miles a week. That's when you're going to get injured or over-fatigued or just not like running anymore. I really hope all of you guys are enjoying this. It's hard. It's stressing your body and your mind in ways that may feel unfamiliar, but it should be fun. So just by making those gradual changes, those gradual increases over time, hopefully you're letting your body adjust and your mind adjust to what you're putting yourself through.
Thank you, Gordon. And you talked about the importance of logging those miles, right? Do you have a favorite app or something that you use?
I use Strava and just, use the Strava app or looking at it on the computer. It keeps a nice sort of record. I don't even have the version that you pay for. I know that you get even more out of it if you pay, I think it's $60 a year, but I just have it. It keeps it in a calendar. And it's cool. I've been doing it for 6 or 7 years now, so I can look back at, what was my mileage in 2018, 2019. So that's a tool that works for me. But there's a lot of different ones. Garmin, Map My Miles, all kinds of different tools. Awesome. And then back in the day, of course, I did the little spiral notebooks in pen. So I have plenty of those all saved as well.
You can also use those. There's nothing against them. So Ricky, talk to us about how one can figure out that long run pace.
All right, so long runs are, sort of an interesting topic because, like Gordon mentioned, long runs are different for everybody. Some people starting off maybe 5 miles is a long run for them. As you start building up that, your endurance, your long runs, become anywhere from like 10 to 15 miles. So finding that right pace, there's no, like, okay, 9-minute pace is what I'm trying to hit to hit this marathon finish time. So what I suggest to many runners is just listen to your body and see how it feels. And again, after you finish that long run, ask yourself, do I still have enough to complete the marathon mileage, to finish, if I had to run 26 miles, would I be able to complete those mileages? So it's not really just looking at your watch while you're running. It's after you complete the run and sort of adjust to yourself, okay, how was this effort level to me? And what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And now is sort of the time to sort of dial in what you're doing right. And if you're doing something wrong, you can always change things up. And each time, you're gonna get that one piece correct. And as you go on with your training plan, you're gonna find that sweet spot where you can continue on 15 miles. Your 15-mile long run, you could go all the way up to 20 miles.
Thank you. And do you recommend folks use a watch or they run with a friend?
Yes. So using a watch, I would say, like what Gordon said, it's just used to log and review your sort of running history and how much you've improved and how far you've gone. It's not really to look at your mileage while you're running, because maybe your first 2 miles you're going at an even pace, and then as you continue on, it might get a little bit tougher and you start slowing down, and you don't want to sort of use that during the run as a gauge of how your effort level is doing. And another tool you could use is your sort of run with a friend. Have a conversation, talk to them, make those mileages a little bit more enjoyable. And before you know it, you'll be 10, 15 miles into the run.
Just make sure it's a friend you like, right? You want to be running with them for 10, 15 miles. Thank you all. I just want to remind everyone, we'll take some questions from the audience. So if you have those, hold on tight. We're just going to take a couple more questions from the expert panelists here. Also, if you're on the live stream, please feel free to add those questions to the chats. Coach Steve is monitoring them. So, panelists, let's talk a little bit about nutrition and mental preparedness. Nutrition, as we all hopefully know, plays a big part in marathon training. For many runners, nutrition can actually make or break their training. Ricky, we'll start with you. How did you learn your nutrition strategy? Does your nutrition plan differ when you race a marathon versus a half marathon?
Well, again, the learning my nutrition strategy was also a lot of trial and error, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are going through as you guys are, a couple weeks into your training plan. You guys are obviously doing maybe something a little different from when you first started to when you're preparing for a run today. Maybe the night before you'll eat a little bit more, fuel up a little bit. And in terms of myself fueling preparing for a half marathon or a marathon, obviously when I'm preparing for a half marathon, I'm only preparing for 13 miles. But when I'm preparing for a full marathon, after the first 13, I have to make sure my body has enough fuel, enough energy to complete another 13 miles after that. So the nutrition plan is going to differ depending on the mileage that you're training for.
Thank you. And Faz, on the mental preparedness side, talk to us about some ways runners can mentally prepare for the journey of 26.2 miles through the streets of New York.
Yeah, so one thing that comes up a lot is people's self-talk, or I like to call it self-messaging. And a lot of times athletes will have really negative self-talk, right? Especially as you get later and later into the mileage. And a lot of times I hear athletes combat that with positive self-talk, but with that being, you got this, or, keep going, or whatever it is. And those are great. I'm not knocking those. But I like to kind of shift it to self-messaging, because we want to start to come up with, especially during this training time, we want to start to come up with things that are specific and directive. Right? So those are like the two biggest pieces of self-messaging that people are missing a lot of times. And when we say specific, when you're running well, when you finish a run and you're like, oh, that was great, I could finish the marathon today, right? What were you doing that helped you run well, right? For me, I know last year I ran New York. That was my first marathon. And for me, I noticed when I was running well, it was really picking my knees up, right? When I was running poorly, I was like doing this weird shuffle thing, right? So my self-messaging was drive your knees, right? It was directive. I was telling myself what to do, and it was specific enough. It was just for me, right? So then on marathon day, and a lot of times self-messaging research is mixed, but for the most part, if you use your own name, it a lot of times has more positive psychological effects, right? So I was literally running the marathon last year going, Amanda, pick your knees up, pick your knees up. And the person next to me probably thought I was crazy. But another piece of it was I used to just say yes to myself all the time, right? So I would be running and I'd just say, this is hard, yes, right? Like this is sweaty, yes, right? Like and that was for me the directive and specific piece that I needed to get through. So those are the two things with self-messaging, something that's directive, something that's specific. And if you're not sure where to start, one of two ways is one is when I run really well, what am I doing specifically? Or when I run very poorly, what am I not doing, right? And so one of those two ways, I like to go with when I'm running well. But one of those two ways is going to lead you to a couple things that you can use along your run because it is going to be a long time and there is going to be a lot associated with it when you're there.
And did you use any kind of journaling or tracking for, when you're running well, when you're not running well? What's happening?
Yeah, so this is where I could practice what I preach a little bit better. But it's funny. I'm going to run London next April, and one of the things I'd like to do more is kind of track. I use Strava as well, but they do give you the opportunity to put notes in there or pictures. I do have a friend that takes a lot of photos at the end of runs, and it's one of my least favorite parts of running with her. But she takes the photos because for her it's like a moment in time where she can remember how that run felt, right? And so sometimes jotting down a couple notes of not just run went well, right? But why did it go well, right? Did you push through a tough part of your race? If it went poorly, why did it go poorly? Like, did I cramp? And so what can I do to kind of avoid that next time? So sometimes I think journaling can feel really tedious for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. It can be creative, like a photo or a video or a log. I know a lot of people use social media and might use it in that way. It could be something that if you're raising money for a charity, maybe you're like shouting that out or something at the end of a run. And kind of putting your journaling out there. But it really can be something pretty simple. Again, number one thing is directive and specific, even with journaling.
Great. So you don't necessarily have to do the pen and paper. You can do it in different ways. Use Strava, use, social media. So Gordon, with the experience of running 35 marathons, is it?
I've done 38.
38. I was going to say it's probably more.
after a while.
I do. No, because I know I'm doing one this fall, and then I'm hoping to do the Boston Marathon in the spring, and if I do that, it'll be 40. So do the math. So exciting.
A lot more than I'm even thinking of running. So with 35 plus marathons, what would you say is the best way that someone can figure out a nutrition plan, given that a lot of these folks are first-time marathon runners? Something that will help them, when race day comes, that they're confident in their nutrition plan as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll just preface this by saying I am not a nutrition expert. I have no initials after my name. So I'll just talk about what has worked for me. And Ricky made that point just a few minutes ago that you have to do trial and error, right? And this is the time to be doing that trial and error. We're all different, we all have different stomachs, intestinal systems, cultural backgrounds. A type of food that might be familiar to me is not familiar to somebody from a different culture or country, perhaps, and they wouldn't do well on my diet. I wouldn't do well on their diet, etc. So stick with find out what works for you as far as your overall diet to fuel an active lifestyle. As for fueling on the run, same thing. You've got to try. Do not try to get through your long runs without any nutrition at all. I think that's one thing we can all agree on, right? You do need to fuel yourself before, during, and after the long runs, and all your runs, really, themselves. Well, perhaps you don't need to fuel during the shorter runs. You definitely do need to fuel during the long runs. So there's lots and lots of stuff to choose from. Really, the variety is almost endless. There's lots of products made specifically for endurance training, gels, chews, sports drinks, salt sticks. There's just so much out there. And I'm not going to recommend a specific product, but you really need to try what works for you. When I was younger and faster, I tended to underfuel. I said, oh, my stomach can't take it. I don't need to fuel that much. I don't sweat as much as other people. And, I never got into a disastrous situation, but as soon as I really took to heart the messaging to fuel more, hydrate more, my long runs and my races improved dramatically. So if you think, oh, I have a sensitive stomach, I can't eat before I run, just try. Really, I can't emphasize this enough. What's the worst that can happen? Do your long run in a place where you have bathroom access, if that's what you're worried about. But really, it helps so much to fuel adequately. And there's almost no downside to overfueling for your long runs. So yeah, just, obviously the simpler the better in a lot of cases. Most people, don't do well eating something that's really heavy in fat or high in complex proteins before a run. You want to stick with simple carbohydrates and just replace the glycogen. Now I'm getting a little sciencey and a little nutrition-y, but I think this is pretty basic. You want to replace what you're burning off. You're burning off mostly glycogen, mostly carbohydrates during running, during endurance activity, and that's what you need to replace and replenish. Don't get into a hole. Don't think, I won't start fueling until I feel really, really hungry, or I won't start hydrating until I feel really, really thirsty. Do it early and often.
Thank you, Gordon. And if folks would like more information on nutrition, the panel that we did, I think it was 16 weeks out. The recording is available on YouTube. They had the expert provide some great information. There were some great questions from the audience, so please feel free to go back and take a look at that. Keep in mind that it is 16 weeks out, right? So you want to keep that timing in mind. So we'll move into questions from the audience in just a couple of minutes. I do want to ask our panelists briefly for a final bit of advice that they have for folks, given that we are 11 and a half weeks out. And Ricky, we'll start with you.
All right. So one piece of advice that I want to share with everybody. We're all talking about how many miles we should do, how fast we should do it, how often we should run, but a lot of things, a lot of times I feel like what we don't talk about is recovery. So recovery and making sure your body and your legs are ready for the next run is also very important. So during your run, you're basically breaking down your body, and when you're finished with it, you want to make sure that your body's in a place where it can recover and you're not injuring yourself, where you have to, sit out for maybe 2 or 3 days. And then at that point, you feel like, okay, I got to pick myself back up again and sort of restart my training program. So you really just want to make sure you recover enough for your next run. So recovery is a very important aspect.
Thank you, Ricky. Faz?
Yeah, I like to reference a skill that we call grabbing, which really all it is really being able to take moments in our lives and really ingrain them into our minds, right? So we can go back and we can remember them. I know last year when it was the first time I was running a marathon, there's a lot of moments throughout New York specifically that are probably the most amazing things I will ever experience. Like, it's just such a great day for New York and people, and you just see so many amazing things. And so grabbing is this skill where when you're having a moment that you're just like, wow, this is really cool, right? Because this is gonna be really cool. And some people may do 38 more, some people may not. And so at the time I said I wasn't gonna do any more, and here we are. But grabbing is basically the skill of using all of my senses in a moment to be able to hang on to that moment. So for example, I can think of, I was on the Queensboro Bridge and it was silent. And that's like the point where you've gone, I don't know, maybe a little over 13, maybe 16 miles, and you have a lot more to go, but you're like, wow, I just did 16. And it was silent, right? And so I grabbed that moment. I was just like, let me see what I can hear. Okay, nothing, you just hear everyone breathing. What can I see, right? Trying to grab everything you can see. That might be like naming colors or looking at people, really trying to ingrain them. What can I smell, right? What can I taste? That one's a little bit more difficult. But really using our senses, because when you go back and you think of this race, you're gonna kind of have this blur moment of, oh my gosh, that was just a lot, right? But if you take really calculated times to just grab something, right, and have that, that's going to be really special. And because you're using your senses and you're really ingraining it, it's going to get coded into our long-term memory a little bit easier. And that's what I think makes the coolest stories when you're all done and everybody asks you how it was weeks out.
Great, and I'm sure it can be applied to so many other experiences in life, right?
Yeah, you could do it for your wedding or like...
Sometimes we share life advice.
Do it for the marathon.
And Gordon.
Okay, I just have to say that gave me chills. That was awesome because when I ran my first marathon 29 years ago, it was spontaneous, the grabbing thing, but it happened at the exact same moment, going over the Queensboro Bridge. So, and 29 years later, I still remember, and a zillion times over the Queensboro Bridge since, I remember that moment in the race because that's when I realized what I was doing. It's like I am running 26.2 miles through New York City, and it's so freaking awesome. I can hardly stand it. So it was just really special, and I'll never forget it. So you guys will have those moments too. But what I can offer as far as final sort of tip, advice, is really enjoy this process as much as you can, because it, you know, especially if you're doing your first one, it's sort of like Faz was just saying, you'll never have another first marathon. You'll have other marathons perhaps, or perhaps not, but you'll never have another first marathon. And just as a corollary to that, the long runs are important. They really are. They're the most important part of your training. So whatever you can do to enhance those, get a training partner if you find you're bored out there. Find a good podcast if you can't find a training partner or prefer to train alone, prefer to just get into your own head, or good music. Whatever you can do to make those long runs awesome, enjoyable, productive, you know, complete them fully. Really do that. Your fueling, your pacing, everything you can do to make the long runs awesome will help you on race day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gordon. So we're going to move into the Q&A from the audience. We'll take some questions from the live audience here, and Coach Steve is monitoring the chat as well on Facebook and YouTube. So let's move into the Q&A.
All right, going to come up here quickly. Hang on. We need a microphone so everyone online can hear you.
Yes, and we just ask that you keep your questions brief, and if you want to mention if you're a first-time runner, if you run the marathon before.
Oh, yeah. It's my first marathon, and, well, yeah, first time. My question's actually, you mentioned having people cheer for us at certain points. Because it's my first marathon, I actually didn't even think about that, but are there suggestions like mile markers to have people do that for us? Thank you.
So I know my family, this is not necessarily my lane, so I'll give it to these two in a second, but I know my family last year talked to every single person they possibly could that had run it to get like advice of like good spots. And then my mom was carrying around a gigantic cardboard cutout of my dog that she held up in the air. So like they told me prior to, I think the best thing I know I can recommend just from doing it is if people are coming to watch, make sure they know what side you're running on, because for the first, 6 miles, you're split. So make sure they know what side you're running on. And then also just people texting you like while it's happening is not going to work, right? So trying to, unless you're like really diligent about it, which I was not. So I kind of knew, okay, my family's going to be at this spot, and this spot, like look for the dog, right? And they have you on an app too, which is always, I heard was super accurate. But it's always good to kind of plan in advance and just ask anyone you know who's done it. They usually have some good tricks of the trade.
You can also check out previous race courses. They have, we'll usually release, before the race, we'll release where certain run clubs are going to be located cheering for groups. So maybe you want to have your family find a spot within that. Yep.
Hi, I lost my voice, I'm sorry. I will be running the first time, and I'm just curious if you have any advice for that morning of the marathon. I know I tend to be a bit anxious, and I know I'll be getting up early. It's going to be a lot of hours. I'm going to be nervous about getting there, and I just worry about expending all of my energy on that before I even run.
You'll be with 50,000 other nervous people.
Yes. Yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, first of all, that's totally normal. So, don't get anxious about getting anxious, if you see what I mean. It's totally normal. You'll be keyed up. I think one thing to keep in mind is that we get an extra hour of sleep because we fall back, we set the clocks back. So if you're worried about, I'm not going to get enough sleep, you have an extra hour to play with. That being said, it doesn't matter all that much how much sleep you get the night before the marathon. And there's actually been studies on this. If you're generally sleeping well, if you generally don't have, chronic insomnia and you have a restless night the night before, that's not going to affect your marathon a lot. We were talking before about rehearsing, what you eat and stuff like that. That's why you should be doing that now. So it's just sort of automatic. You're going to get up, have your peanut butter and jelly sandwich 4 hours before your start time, or whatever it is. Then you're going to drink your 8 ounces of Gatorade 2 hours before, or whatever sort of routine you've been in. As many things as possible as you can do just sort of automatically on race morning. Don't try anything new. Don't give yourself plenty of time in the mornings so that you're not racing around before the race. We actually say that at our course strategy sessions at the expo. Don't race before the race. Make sure you have plenty of time, nothing new. Enjoy that extra hour of sleep, and realize it's totally normal to be nervous before a marathon. It's a big deal. It matters, and it's actually a good, healthy sign. It indicates that you're invested in this.
Thank you, Gordon. Ricky, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I want to just add something. You're not going to be the only one anxious in Staten Island. You're going to be, everyone around you is going to, have the same feeling that you're having butterflies in your stomach. So you just really have to trust in your training. You've already done the work. You're in Staten Island. Just remember to have fun out there.
I was going to say, too, a lot of times when we get anxious, it's about like how we appraise our anxiety, right? So Gordon was really just doing a great job of explaining that, but just basically how we view the anxiety, I can view it one of two ways, right? I'm really nervous to do something really big, or like this nervousness is telling me I'm excited, right? And like kind of getting curious about that anxiousness can be really healthy, but also like bring things you can obviously ditch before you run, but like I saw people with magazines and newspapers and coloring books and like just like things that if you're really somebody that is very sensory and likes having things like that, bring them. You just not going to run with them, but you can always ditch them, things like that.
Awesome. And I think we have a question online, right?
Yeah, the online Facebook community and YouTube is off the walls with questions. They're joined everything, you guys. I've never seen it so active before. But the first question I think is really a unique question, but I think a lot of us are going to feel this. It's from Webster Group. Me, 38-year-old, and my dad, 68-year-old, are coming from Australia, from a small town with 600 people. So the question is, how do you approach a big city marathon coming from such a small location? How do you adapt to the confidence side of it with a lot of people? How do you adapt to the crowds you're going to be dealing with in the start area? So kind of talk about the adjustment with so many people in New York City coming from a small town.
The one bit of advice that I would offer is save your tourism activities for after the race. Don't spend all of Friday and Saturday walking all over Manhattan and trying, a million different cuisines maybe that you've never tried before, or, having all these fun adventures. If you can, organize your trip to New York so you do that fun stuff after the race. You'll be taking a tour of New York City, right? A 26.2-mile tour of all 5 boroughs. So consider that you're running around New York City, and then focus on a few little things afterwards. But just embrace it. New York is an amazing place to come visit. People are super friendly. You'll have a lot of fun, and all the advice we've been offering the other people. Don't get nervous, or realize that nervousness is just a part of it, and everyone else will be nervous as well. And embrace the New York City experience.
We have another question that pertains to people in Florida, but I think because of how hot it is in New York City even, this pertains to everyone. The question is, training here in Florida is getting tough. Any advice on optimal training considering how the extreme heat that we're facing right now?
We had a question from Texas last time.
Exactly, yeah.
Ricky, did you have anything to add?
So training in heat, it's tough out there. So just make sure you hydrate enough. So part of your nutrition plan, before you go off for that run, have a couple more glasses of water and make sure you feel enough. And don't go out on your runs without energy gels and stuff like that.
Anything to add, Gordon?
Yeah, I would just say, we have heat and humidity here too. It's probably not as bad as Florida or Texas, but train by effort rather than trying to maintain a specific pace. And I think Ricky talked about that before. Just listen to your body. Everyone slows down in the heat and humidity, and it's just even with the long runs, it's about time on your feet rather than trying to force a certain pace on a hot and humid day.
Awesome. Do we have more questions from the audience? Okay, I see a hand in the back.
Hello. Okay.
Yes, you said to start slow, right? Do you recommend any mile when to start picking up the pace, like any recommended mileage?
So when I say start slow, it's really based on your effort level. So make sure your first, say if you're training you're running the marathon, on your mile 13 and compared to your mile 1, it should sort of feel like the same effort level. And when you heard Faz say when she's crossing the Queensboro Bridge, that's when a lot of people hit the wall. I think that's mile 16 or mile 18, somewhere around there. So after at mile 18, you only have maybe another 8 miles left. And if you still feel 100%, you still feel great, that's when you could pick up. But don't pick up too quickly, too soon. Like on the, when you're on the Staten Island Bridge, you have all energy. That's not the time to go fast. That's not the time to pick up. That's the time to slow down. After you cross the Queensboro Bridge and you still feel great, you could still do another 8 or 10 miles. That's the time, go for it, and just let it all out.
Thank you, Ricky. Do we have an online question? Oh, we have another question from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you. I joined a little late, so forgive me if this question has been answered. But I'm going to be running my second marathon, and one of the hardest things, it was wonderful, but one of the hardest things was starting late, because I train at 7 in the morning, usually 7, 8. So do you recommend to start the last couple weeks training later, or just make some adjustments on the day? Because I started at noon, and usually I'm out running at 7, so it's not the same.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We get that question a lot, but I don't think anyone has asked it today, so thank you for bringing that up. I would say, the best time of day to train, I always say, is the time that works the best for you. But if you can do maybe 1 or 2 of your long runs at the time or close to the time of your start, that is something to be aware of. But for me, I like to get up and do my long run first thing in the morning, especially in the summer. I'm out the door by 6 or 7, and obviously the race doesn't start then. But I try to do, maybe when it gets a little cooler, do 1 or 2 of your long runs at 9, 10, whatever your start time is.
Great question. Faz?
I was just going to add from like a psychological perspective, right? The most, and it's been said in a couple of different ways, but the most you can replicate your actual day, the more at least psychologically prepared you're going to be. So whether that's, New York Roadrunners actually does a great job of, I believe you all do like the actual chunks of the course maybe as you get closer. I couldn't go to those last year, but I wish I could have, because it would have been helpful just to like be familiar. things like the Australian family from the small town, like if it's even like watching videos of New York, I know that feels so kind of far away, but or crowd noise, things like that, like anything you can do to kind of replicate it, it's exposure, right? And so it's not going to be perfect. It might not be in reach, and if it's not, it's okay. But anything you can do to kind of build that in prior to race day is always going to make you just a teeny bit more comfortable.
Awesome. Thank you, Faz. And we're going to take one last question from the online audience.
All right, so question from our runner. Scott on YouTube says, and for Ricky, this is for you. Should we choose a pace group based on our desired finish or be more aggressive early on? How do you pick a pace group? How do you figure out what we should run with a race day?
So again, that goes back to listening to your body during your training runs. And we have pace groups all throughout the course. You can be a little bit more aggressive, pick the group, pick your PR time that you want to follow. And, if throughout the race, you have to fall back a little bit, you have another group right behind them that you can catch up on, and it'll bring you to the finish at an even pace, even effort, and we just stagger throughout the course like that.
Thank you, Ricky. I want to thank our expert panelists, Ricky, Amanda, or Faz, and Gordon. I want to thank Coach Steve for helping put this entire event together. I want to thank AJ for making sure those live streams are working okay and the recording's going to go up and we're going to have closed captioning that's auto-generated. I want to thank our Run Center staff who are not only distributing bibs, but helped put this event together. Thank you so much to all of you for coming. Congratulations to so many of you who are running your first marathon. I know you're going to do great. And thank you to all of the folks that are joining us on the live stream. Please note that you can find this recording at a later time on the YouTube page. And we look forward to seeing you at the next sessions on September 21st and October 12th. Have a wonderful night, everyone.